So, Dr. Eric Meyer is a licensed clinical psychologist at the VA Center of Excellence for Research on Returning War Veterans. He's an experienced clinician, and he provides evidence-based mental health treatment and intervention for veterans. He has published journal articles and book chapters on PTSD, mental health, TBI, suicide, and self-harm. Dr. Meyer?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, what a great opportunity to speak to this group. Thank you for the invitation. And what I want to talk about today is really my mission as a clinical researcher. And how I view my mission is really to connect with veterans, to hear their stories, to gather information from them in a structured way, and then apply knowledge of psychological theories and so forth as best we can to make improvements and advances in mental health service delivery, to better prepare veterans to help them improve their lives. And I'm going to briefly touch on two studies. The first is an assessment study where we're following, apologize for my voice, by the way, we're following a group of Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans over time to learn which factors predict better readjustment, community reintegration, and functioning, and so forth. And in the second study, that's actually a treatment study where we translate knowledge gained from the assessment study and other studies like it to develop and implement or test out innovative treatment approaches. So I'm going to be talking first about a program of research that we refer to as Project SERVE. It stands for Study Evaluating Returning Veterans Experiences. And the objective of this program of research is to identify modifiable or changeable psychological factors that influence patterns of functioning over time for mental health challenges and functional readjustment and disability in Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, and to inform treatment development. So who are the veterans that we're studying? Over the program of research, which has multiple phases, we have enrolled over 600 Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, all of whom are enrolled at Central Texas VA for healthcare. We deliberately oversample for women veterans in order to better understand their particular experiences with readjustment. About 37 years old on average, predominantly Army, of course, given our geographic location. And we oversample for veterans experiencing mental health challenges. So about half of the veterans in the sample have a lifetime or current mental health diagnosis, that is one or more diagnosis. And just under half report to us that they've experienced a traumatic brain injury, and the vast majority of those are mild TBIs. What information do we collect? Well, we collect quite a lot of information, and I'm going to sort of summarize it briefly here. But in short, we conduct a very intensive assessment with the veterans when they come into the study. They do a baseline assessment. We spend the better part of a day with them. We do intensive gold standard, sort of state-of-the-art diagnostic interviews to understand their post-traumatic stress symptoms, other mental health challenges, traumatic brain injury, history of suicidality. And then we administer a host of self-report measures to get at the other factors that we think are going to predict or influence their functional readjustment over time. Before I move on from this point, so I'm emphasizing how intensive this assessment is, partly because one of the things that many veterans have told us is at the end of that long assessment day, they'll kind of pause and they'll tell us, I really appreciate the opportunity to tell my story. It's, as Lieutenant Colonel Warner was saying, the opportunity to connect and to really slow down and tell their story is something that they really appreciate. They'll tell us that they've never really had the opportunity to do that during their military service or with another VA provider. And so then we start off building that rapport, and then we follow up with veterans over time. We administer questionnaires by mail or over the phone at periodic intervals, and then we bring them back for a final face-to-face assessment. And despite the intensity and the time involved in participating, we have very high retention rates over time, which I think speaks to that initial connection, as well as, of course, the dedication of our veteran participants, who invariably tell us, the reason I'm doing this is to try to help another veteran. So whatever I need to do, I'm happy to help out with. Another aspect of this program of research that I'm not going to talk much about, but I thought I would mention, is that we give veterans the opportunity, the optional the option of providing biological samples for genetic and other biomarker analyses. What are the contributions of this research program? Well, so this is a research program. However, we take our clinical interactions with our veteran participants very seriously. And at the end of that intensive baseline assessment, we really have a unique opportunity to help connect them or reconnect them with mental health services. Again, in the prior presentation, a lot of focus was on overcoming barriers to receiving services. So at the end of that day, having gathered all that information and built that rapport, we can help veterans work through some of those stigma-related issues, attitudinal and educational barriers to receiving services. So we do that with a large proportion of our veterans, even though they're already enrolled in VA. We contribute to the scientific literature, and we also do our best to get out there and disseminate the knowledge that we're gaining to our colleagues around the country who are also working with veterans. And we have a strong training mission as well. We've contributed to the career development and training of a fairly large number of clinical researchers at this point, and then a very large number of undergraduates who are considering making their career in this area. Okay, I want to briefly touch on a couple of our key findings from this program of research. However, I realized that my colleague, Dr. Brianne DeBeer, was able to come in today, even though she's on maternity leave, and she's the first author on this paper, so I'm going to defer to her to talk about this, which is great because she'll have a little more time. These are a couple of findings that were picked up by different media and academic outlets as being, according to them, they found them important enough to disseminate more broadly beyond the scientific publication. Okay, so in this second paper, we took a closer look at how veterans are living with the experience of chronic pain. So even though mental health is a big focus of our research, we take a broader perspective. So this sample was limited to those veterans experiencing chronic pain, which is a large proportion of returning war veterans. Musculoskeletal injuries are the most common diagnosis in returning war veterans. And we looked at how veterans relate to the experience of going about the business of leading their lives, even though they're experiencing chronic pain. And we took a look at the construct called chronic pain acceptance, which really refers to, okay, I'm experiencing chronic pain. How willing am I to go about engaging in important activities in my life that I value, even though I'm in pain? Versus, on the other hand, sort of endorsing the belief that it's important for me to get my pain under control before I can go about my activities. And we administer a questionnaire, and people vary on this. And it turns out that people who are more accepting and willing in relation to the experience of chronic pain have lower levels of disability over time. And in fact, the effect of this predictor got stronger during the course of the study when we followed them. And we controlled for other important factors that we know predict level of disability, including level of PTSD, level of depression, whether they had a traumatic brain injury, how much alcohol they used, and very importantly, how severe they told us their pain was. So it turns out that how accepting and willing you are in relation to living with chronic pain was a stronger predictor of level of pain-related disability than pain severity. Next, I want to talk about a couple of papers that focused on the interrelated ideas or constructs of self-compassion and mindfulness. And here I'm going to slow down a little bit and talk about what I mean by these things. But I just want to give you the take-home messages from these two papers first. So in the first one, we found something that surprised us a bit, which is that level of self-compassion among these veterans predicted level of post-traumatic stress symptom severity even more strongly than the amount of combat they experienced. And we studied that over time, and we found that that finding got stronger over time. And then in the second paper, we wanted to extend that to looking at whether these factors accounted for level of disability. And we found that both mindfulness and self-compassion uniquely predicted level of disability even after controlling for how severe their post-traumatic stress symptoms were. And so I just want to do a 2-minute clip here to introduce us to the concept of mindfulness, as it may be a newer concept for some folks.
Mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment, and it's paying attention in a particular way because we're paying attention in a friendly way, in a non-judgmental way. We're moving into the body and out of being on autopilot. So most of the time we're caught either in the past or in the future with our thoughts, and we're really missing what's going on in this moment.
A lot of people think, well, I'm paying attention all the time. I'm here in my life. But really, in this moment, a lot of us aren't right here. Where are we? Right? We're either rehearsing the future in planning mind, thinking, what do I have to do next and next and next? Or maybe we're rehashing the past, thinking about what happened before, and I should have said this instead of that. So between all the rehearsing and the rehashing, we forget that this moment right here is when we're alive.
Mindfulness is a pause button, so that you can just stop and be there and stop the mind chatter, stop the worry and the anxiety, or at least put it at bay.
Okay, so mindfulness is one of these modifiable factors. We can train people on mindfulness. We can teach them how to be more mindful. And then the related concept of self-compassion, and I've got a video in just a second, but briefly, the diagram in the upper right shows the three components or factors underlying self-compassion. You can see how it ties in with mindfulness. So the first is mindful awareness of suffering, the idea that a person has to be aware of and acknowledge that, yes, I'm experiencing emotional distress. Second, a sense of common humanity, the notion that all human beings experience suffering. And so when they experience suffering, that there's a sense of connection with others and with humanity in general, as opposed to feeling alone and isolated in their distress. Hearkening back to the theme brought up in the first talk about the importance of cohesion and connection. And then finally, self-kindness, making a deliberate, intentional, mindful choice to turn kindness inward in a way that we might do for someone else, but is often harder to do with ourselves. And so in this video, again, another brief clip from the same series goes into a bit greater depth about compassion and how mindfulness can be used to cultivate or train self-compassion.
Old meditation practice, just like focusing on the breath. So it has been around for thousands of years as well. And what we do here is we are using phrases. And we're using phrases and then we go through different categories. So usually we would start with ourselves, sending friendly wishes to ourselves, and then to a friend, or we could switch those. So to a friend or a loved one first, and then to ourselves. And then there are more categories. All the phrases start with may you or may I. May you be happy, may I be happy. So it's very important not to get mixed up here with positive affirmations. Like a positive affirmation would start with like, I am happy, or you are happy. And if this is not the case, it can sometimes be very hard. So what we do is we wish this. So it's a heartfelt wish for ourselves or the people around us. Because as you might hear us talk about this, it might feel like, oh God, this is so fake and this is so not working for me. And what's really important is the intention makes it work. So you just repeat those phrases, and with that you will change your neurocircuitry just by the repetition, so it becomes more normal that you hear those words. And so in a situation where you would usually judge yourself or somebody else, it makes it more likely that those words will come up.
Working in my substance abuse and homeless populations, I frequently hear laughters like, what, you want to turn us into punks with this, you want us to be nice, or you want us to be marks. And this is quite different, right? So the idea isn't that you're a pushover or that you're a mark. The idea is how you hold yourself with kindness. We all know, right, the world is hard enough, right? Life can be difficult enough. Do we need to beat ourselves up in our own internal experience?
Okay, so moving on to a second study, just have one slide on this. It really builds on this type of information. And what we're doing here is applying a approach, a psychological treatment, an approach to psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a treatment that's been around for about 20 years. It's one of the treatments that VA disseminates nationally as an evidence-based treatment for depression. And we've adapted it, and we're applying it to try to help veterans who are suffering from both post-traumatic stress and alcohol use problems. Why do we think this is a good idea to try? Well, we know that alcohol problems and post-traumatic stress tend to co-occur at very high rates. And when they co-occur, it's a particularly challenging combination of problems to try to help people with. And what we think links these problems together is avoidance of emotional distress or avoidance of unwanted thoughts. And so this treatment approach was explicitly designed to try to target that factor. And so what we specifically try to target in ACT are these factors over here on the bottom left. All of this work is aimed at behavior change. ACT is a form of what we refer to as behavior therapy, where we're helping people make the changes in their behavior that they likely already know that they need to make, but they're stuck psychologically for various reasons. And so we train them in mindfulness, which sets them up or sets us up to help them be more accepting or willing in relation to difficult emotions. We do some self-compassion focused exercises. All of this work is in the context of doing values work, values clarification, to help them clarify what's important to them and where do they want to spend their effort making behavior change. We are conducting at this point, small treatment outcome study where we are aiming to have 30 veterans complete the treatment protocol. It's delivered in the form of individual psychotherapy. I don't have data to present today because some of the veterans are still receiving the treatment, but the study is nearing completion at this point. And obviously, we hope to see improvement in these outcomes here, reductions in mental health symptoms, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, improvements in functioning and quality of life. Okay, so in terms of what are some resources that are just out there for anyone to use, the VA, the National Center for PTSD, has produced something called the Mindfulness Coach. I use this in the study. I have veterans put it on their phone. Unfortunately, right now, it's only for iPhone users, but they use this while they're going through the therapy. It has guided mindfulness exercises and so forth. Veterans really like it. There's also an app coach, which I don't introduce until the end of treatment. It's more of like a booster for folks who have already gone through the treatment approach. Also, for folks who work with veterans, particularly who are in their peer networks, I want to point out a couple of websites that VA has produced. Both of these are aimed at helping veterans overcome barriers to receiving mental health treatment. The first, Make the Connection, is something that we're trying to get funded to research in terms of how well it actually works to get veterans into mental health treatment. And what it largely consists of is a video gallery of video recorded interviews with real veterans talking about their struggles with mental health challenges and then how they overcame stigma and other challenges to actually receive treatment. And what's so powerful about this one is, in my opinion, is that it can be personalized. Veterans can go through and sort through the video gallery to find stories from veterans that resemble themselves in certain important characteristics. And I think it makes for a very powerful user experience. And the second one is a similar website, but it's more specifically focused on post-traumatic stress disorder treatment. So again, those are out there. Make the Connection and About Face. And I'll end, of course, by thanking our veteran participants, my collaborators, our funding sources, and our staff and trainees. And also, if you like any of the presentations today, feel free to leave a little something in the tip basket, apparently, in the middle of the room there. Thank you.
And Dr. Meyer, I really appreciate you coming here today to tell us this. Thank you so much. And for that, we have this nice plaque. Thank you. I have your slide.